Hey heroes, and welcome to another ultimate episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we talked about how the Reed Richards of Earth 1610 fell to madness and became a supervillain known as the Maker. When we last left off, he had been defeated by the Ultimates, his world's equivalent of the Avengers, as well as his former Fantastic Four teammates, including his lost love, Susan Storm, who imprisoned him in a superhuman holding facility called the Cube for his various crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, on Earth 616, the prime Marvel universe we usually talk about here, there was an event known as the Age of Ultron, in which the Avengers' robotic adversary nearly succeeded in his longtime goal of wiping out humanity. Now, we're not going to go into the details of that here, but the important thing is that a lot of time traveling was done before the heroes of Earth finally stopped Ultron and prevented his dark future from coming to pass. Of course, this was far from the first time that the denizens of the Marvel Universe had used time travel as a means to an end, but it was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back, and for a moment the space-time continuum nearly shattered. Fortunately, reality is a hardy thing, and the universe survived. However, the fractures in time and space that were caused by this event had a number of effects. Notably, the World Eater Galactus was caught in one of these fissures and transported to Reality 1610, the Ultimate Universe. Fortunately for the heroes of Earth 1610, this wasn't the first time they'd encountered a visitor from the prime Marvel Universe, as months prior, the villain Mysterio discovered a rift in their two realities and used it to send remote piloted robotic avatars into the Ultimate Universe. That whole situation resulted in the Spider-Men of both realities, the Peter Parker of Earth 616 and Miles Morales of Earth 1610, joining forces to defeat Mysterio. The villain was then taken into custody by the Ultimates and imprisoned on an Earth that was not his own. When Galactus then arrived on Earth 1610 and prepared to begin feeding on the planet, the Tony Stark of that reality determined, based on its dimensional energy signature, that Galactus had come from the same reality as Mysterio. Stark went to interrogate Mysterio, and upon learning that the World Eater was there, the only advice that the villain could offer was to talk to Reed Richards. Stark asked if Richards was somehow responsible for what was happening, but Mysterio explained that on his world, Reed Richards was a universally beloved genius who saved the world from Galactus and other cosmic threats. Having already gone through the rift once before, Miles Morales offered to use Mysterio's portal to travel to Earth 616 and search for a solution, while the Maker, much to the shock and dismay of the other heroes, volunteered to go with him. The Ultimates were naturally skeptical, and Susan even started strangling him with an invisible force field, but in the end they acquiesced and accepted the fact that their Reed had no desire to see the Earth be completely annihilated. Although Tony did at least give Miles a weapon and warned him not to hesitate to use it if the Maker stepped out of line. In any event, Spider-Man and the Maker successfully made the trip to the Marvel Universe, and while they didn't speak to the Reed Richards of that reality, they did infiltrate his headquarters, the Baxter Building, and learned everything they could about Galactus. Of course, while there, Reed also got a glimpse of what his life could have looked like if things had gone differently with Susan and the Fantastic Four hadn't broken up. He also had a brief encounter with his counterpart's daughter, Valeria, who quickly recognized that the intruder was not her father, forcing the Maker and Morales to flee. They successfully returned to their own reality, and Reed seemingly began to regret the path that he'd taken, apologizing to Susan for his actions. Working with the heroes of Earth once again, Richards enacted a plan to trap Galactus in the negative zone, and in the end the Thor of their reality sacrificed himself to force the World Eater through the portal. Earth 1610 was saved, and it seemed as though the Maker was ready to try and redeem himself. There was even a point where a visitor from yet another reality, Miles Morhames, the ultimate Spider-Ham, came to warn Susan Storm that Earths, where she and Reed had a child together, were far more likely to survive. Susan begrudgingly accepted this and planned to bear the Maker's child for the sake of their universe, but Reed knew that she didn't actually want to do this, and since this version of Sue was engaged to Ben Grimm, he artificially inseminated her with Ben's genetic material instead. That gambit eventually proved to be a success when the newborn daughter of Susan Storm and Ben Grimm displayed end-zone energy powers, which she used to close a dimensional portal, ending a series of invasions from another universe. However, Reed's apparent attempts at redemption were little more than a ruse, designed to earn back the trust of his compatriots, while behind the scenes he continued to plot as the Maker. In the midst of all of this, General Nick Fury, in his efforts to rebuild S.H.I.E.L.D., secretly recruited Reed to come up with contingency plans in preparation for any number of world-ending scenarios. It seems that this was none too soon because, at the same time, the multiverse was faced with a crisis that threatened to destroy all of reality, the Incursions. Now, we did already talk about this in my video on the Molecule Man, but I'll give a brief recap here. Basically, an obscenely powerful race of extra-dimensional entities called the Beyonders intended on destroying every world in the multiverse simultaneously as part of a grand experiment. To accomplish this, they transformed a lab technician named Owen Reese into a powerful superhuman called the Molecule Man, ensuring that the accident which caused this occurred simultaneously in every possible reality and timeline. Each Molecule Man was effectively a time bomb on a universal scale, and the Beyonders intended on setting them all off at once. In an attempt to stop this, the Molecule Man and Dr. Doom of Earth 616 traveled the multiverse, killing other Molecule Men, setting them off early. However, the destruction of these realities resulted in a contraction in the multiverse's timeline, causing entire universes to crash into each other, with the Earth always at the point of impact. This is what is referred to as an incursion. During each incursion, one Earth would appear in the skies of another, and vice versa, for approximately 8 hours before the two worlds collided, triggering an explosion that destroyed both universes. However, if within that 8-hour window one of the two Earths was destroyed before crashing into the other, that specific incursion would be interrupted, staving off destruction for two universes at the cost of one planet. Before long, the Ultimate Universe was threatened by these incursions. However, the Maker secretly began intercepting them, and over the following months he destroyed a total of 67 alternate Earths to save his own. Elsewhere in the multiverse, others were pursuing similar solutions, including on Earth 616, where the Atlantean king Namor assembled a clandestine cabal, including the insane Inhuman Maximus and the mad Titan Thanos. However, no matter what they or anyone else did, the cascading destruction across the multiverse could not be stopped, and even universes that were seemingly saved came to a premature end, as their natural life cycles were greatly accelerated. Meanwhile, the Beyonders traveled the multiverse, slaughtering cosmic abstracts to hasten the destruction, including the living Tribunal, which is one of the single most powerful entities in the known Omniverse. Soon, the artificial intelligence from the Maker's sentient city determined that in the span of a single day, the total number of universes remaining dropped from hundreds of thousands to less than 2 dozen. Now, this sudden, sharp decline was actually because of an incident in which Doctor Doom, the Molecule Man, and Doctor Strange confronted the Beyonders directly. Using an unfathomably powerful bomb made from a multitude of Molecule Men, Doom succeeded in defeating the Beyonders and stole their power. However, the resulting explosion obliterated much of the remaining multiverse. As the incursions continued in the few remaining realities, the next Earth to encroach into the Ultimate Universe was a rare example of a world involved in two simultaneous incursions. As a result, this Earth was also investigated by Namor's Cabal, who destroyed it and ended up on Earth 1610. There, the Cabal met the Maker, who joined forces with them in an attempt to survive the end of everything. Soon, time ran out, and the only two Earths remaining were Earth 616 and Earth 1610, the Prime Marvel Universe and the Ultimate Universe, and those two were on a collision course. The Maker convinced General Fury to launch a full-scale assault on the other Earth in a last-ditch effort to fight for their own survival, and the conflict between the two universes served as a distraction while the Maker completed his own plans. You see, on Earth 616, Valeria Richards and the Future Foundation were completing the construction of an escape ship capable of surviving the destruction of the entire multiverse by incorporating skin samples from the fallen living Tribunal that had been harvested by her father and the Black Panther. Meanwhile, the Maker and the Cabal stole the plans for this vessel and used them to build a life raft of their own. With seemingly no way to prevent the end of everything, the Maker and his allies escaped before they were annihilated along with the last remaining universes. Meanwhile, using the power that he'd stolen from the Beyonders, Doctor Doom recovered fragments from dozens of destroyed Earths, and forged them together into a patchwork planet called Latverion, though most simply referred to it as Battleworld. Doom, of course, made himself the God Emperor of this new world, where only he and Doctor Strange remembered anything from before. The Cabal's life raft landed on Battleworld, where those inside remained in stasis for 8 years before it was discovered and finally opened. The members of the Cabal emerged and killed a member of Battleworld's police force, the Thor Corps, before escaping to try and make sense of the bizarre planet they now found themselves on. Doctor Strange subsequently investigated their life raft and found that Miles Morales had snuck aboard. Realizing that Miles was a refugee from the multiverse who remembered life before Battleworld, Strange brought him to the other life raft, which he'd already discovered 3 years earlier, and opened it to release the survivors from his own reality, including the Reed Richards of Earth 616, Mr. Fantastic. The Thor Corps subsequently tracked down the Cabal, leading to a battle which drew the attention of Strange and the other heroes, who attempted to intervene. This is where things started to hit the fan on Battleworld, as Doctor Doom took notice of his old rival's sudden appearance and decided to confront him personally. Doom arrived and called out Richard's name, and the Maker briefly wondered if he was addressing him, to which Maximus assured him that he absolutely was not. After a brief conflict in which Doom killed a Phoenix-empowered Cyclops, Doctor Strange teleported the heroes and villains to safety in the hopes that they could overthrow his tyrannical rule. In response, God Emperor Doom killed Strange for betraying him. Thus, the Reed Richards of Earth 616 and 1610 not only met for the first time, but were forced to work together to defeat an omnipotent Victor Von Doom. Before long, the two Reeds discovered that Doom was secretly using the Molecule Man as a battery to store the obscene amount of power that they'd stolen from the Beyonders. Unsurprisingly, the Maker betrayed his more heroic counterpart counterpart in an attempt to claim the power for himself, using a temporal device to devolve the other Reed into an ape-like form. However, the Molecule Man had no interest in letting the Maker achieve apotheosis, and simply sliced his body to pieces before restoring Mr. Fantastic. Thus, the fate of reality itself was determined by a grudge match between the Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom of Earth 616, and Richards ultimately tricked Doom into admitting that he could have done a better job wielding the Beyonder's infinite power. The Molecule Man agreed, and in the end he destroyed Battleworld before siding with Richards to begin rebuilding the multiverse, starting with Reality 616. However, as each universe was reborn, the Molecule Man secretly placed a slice of the Maker in each one, allowing him to exist in every reality all at once. To be clear, these Makers were not simply other-dimensional variants of one another, but rather multiple bodies sharing the same mind, and most universes still had their own local Reed Richards regardless. In this state, the Maker began plotting to merge the multiverse into a single, more powerful eternity, and set his sights on the prime reality, Earth 616, to serve as a staging ground for his schemes. There, he joined forces with a clandestine organization known as Whisper, so let's take a minute to talk about them. This group can trace their origins back to a supervillain named Dr. Evald Skorpion, a nihilistic madman whose schemes were often foiled by the superhuman scientist Dr. Adam Brashear, today better known as the Blue Marvel. In his attempts to end the world, Skorpion founded a group called Vesp, but continued to have little success, and his followers grew disillusioned with his puerile antics. Because of this, they agreed to join the retired Hungarian spy master János Trovaja, who was embittered and vengeful after his daughter Maria was abducted and killed by agents from Russia's Red Room, due to his own political affiliations and activities from decades prior. In the wake of this, Trovaja faked his own death and, with top talent from Vesp at his disposal, forged a new group called Whisper, with the goal of opposing the Red Room and other clandestine organizations. I should probably note here that at the time of her death, Maria Trovaja was married to Hank Pym, who of course went on to become the original Ant-Man, and was inspired to fight evil in her memory. Furthermore, unbeknownst to her husband or father, Maria was pregnant at the time of her capture, and her daughter Nadia was kept alive by the Red Room, who soon recognized the girl's aptitude for science. I will also note that early in the Marvel Age of Heroes, Evald Skorpion was killed in another encounter with Adam Brashear, but you can refer to my video on the Blue Marvel for more details on those circumstances. Over the following years, Whisper continued operating in the shadows, but had very little success, and eventually the Maker stepped in, seizing control of the organization and reshaping it into a cult of mad scientists. With him at the helm, select members of Whisper were surgically converted into insect-like post-humans before joining his inner circle. Furthermore, when the billionaire superhero Roberto da Costa, aka Sunspot, bought out the terrorist group Advanced Idea Mechanics in an attempt to turn them into a force for good, many of their less scrupulous scientists were poached by the Maker and joined Whisper. János Trovaja tried to outmaneuver the Maker and continue using the organization for his own ends, including an attempt to abduct a now teenage Nadia, who by this point had escaped from the Red Room and become the new Wasp. But when these plans backfired and his attempts to meet his granddaughter failed, Trovaja decided to give up and went into hiding. Meanwhile, in his time on Earth 616, the Maker realized that the laws of nature differed somewhat from his native reality, as if the universe itself was more flamboyant, making the fantastic even more possible. For example, he continued to use the artificial intelligence known previously as City, but in this reality it identified itself as Omnitronicus, the organomechanic nexus iterated techno-radical organizational networked intelligent computer unity system. In one of his early experiments here, the Maker located the scattered molecules of the deceased Dr. Skorpion and downloaded his essence into a perfect higher dimension crystal called a Neohedron, creating a new form of life that he dubbed Life Minus. The Maker then grafted this crystal onto a new body he genetically engineered using gorilla and scorpion DNA. In this state, the Neohedron had the power to convert others into crystal-headed Life Minus organisms like itself. However, he was opposed by Roberto da Costa's Avengers idea mechanics, who deduced a countermeasure that destroyed the Neohedron and reverted its victims to normal. After that, while da Costa's AIM clashed with other foes, including an ongoing feud with S.H.I.E.L.D., the Maker spied on them with nano cameras that infected their home base like a virus. He also assembled his own team to counter AIM's new Avengers, the new Revengers, which included the mutated man-rat Vermin, the alien cyborg Scar, the power skrull Pybok, the all-seeing demon Asti, the hallucination-inducing Angar the Screamer, the white tiger Angela del Toro, and of course the sentient computer Omnitronicus. Waiting for an opportunity to strike, the Maker and the new Revengers launched an assault on AIM while they were still on the back foot in their conflict with S.H.I.E.L.D. However, AIM learned the location of Whisper's base and tricked S.H.I.E.L.D. agent John Garrett into bombing that out of existence. With his home base wiped off the map, the Maker fled and attempted to capture the President of the United States, intending on auctioning him off to fund his further exploits. However, unbeknownst to the Maker, he wasn't the only one spying on his foes, and having learned that he would try this, da Costa had already prepared a countermeasure. The Maker was defeated and imprisoned once again, but holding him would prove to be even more difficult than it seemed. Because he existed in every universe at once, the same mind sharing innumerable bodies, he was able to simply have one of his adjacent selves cross over to Reality 616. This time he traveled to Counter-Earth, a planet on the opposite side of the sun, and forged an alliance with Herbert Wyndham, the High Evolutionary, who we've talked about on the channel before. With Wyndham's technology and his own brilliance, the Maker was able to construct a device that allowed them to peer into the superflow, the informational space that exists between universes. This is another thing that was primarily possible because of the physics of the Prime Universe, which allowed for access to conceptual spaces. Within the superflow, the Maker observed the entities that he called Death Celestials, but are also commonly known as aspirants. We've also talked about them on the channel before, so I'm not really going to go into detail here, but for a fuller explanation, you can watch my video on Captain Universe. The short version is that they were created by the first Firmament, the living embodiment of the very first incarnation of the cosmos, before there even was a multiverse. By tapping into the power of the Death Celestials, the Maker was able to start dissolving the superflow, effectively demolishing the walls between realities and causing the multiverse to begin merging into a single, gigantic, continuous universe. However, this actually played into the first Firmament's plan, as it wanted to consume the newly unified multiverse and reclaim its original position as the one reality. Furthermore, the embodiment of the current cosmos, eternity, had been weakened since the death and rebirth of the multiverse, and the Maker's plan failed to strengthen it enough to escape the first Firmament. Nonetheless convinced that he was right and knowing that some might try to stop him, the Maker also used this opportunity to adjust reality and resurrect the original incarnation of the Ultimates from his own reality, altering their minds so that they would obey him. However, when the Ultimates of Earth 616 intervened, a team that included Carol Danvers, Monica Rambeau, America Chavez, and Adam Brashear, the 1610 Captain America began to question Richards' authority over them. In response, the Maker unmade the resurrected Captain America, causing the others to turn against him. He attempted to make further adjustments to reality, but before he could, Monica Rambeau completely drained his body of energy, effectively freezing him at absolute zero. The two teams of Ultimates debated on what to do with him in case this didn't work, but the High Evolutionary rendered this discussion a moot point by smashing him to pieces, killing that particular body. With the Maker's defeat, the High Evolutionary and the two teams of Ultimates were able to work together to undo what the Maker had started, restoring the Superflow and the multiverse. This finally strengthened Eternity, allowing him to escape from the first Firmament's grasp, effectively saving the multiverse once again. In the wake of that conflict, the other previous embodiments of the multiverse took the first Firmament, bringing him outside of any known plane of existence, beyond even the far shore. The other original Ultimates, meanwhile, set out into the multiverse to begin hunting down the Maker's other bodies. Now, that's all the time we have for this week, but if you want to read more of the Maker's exploits for yourself, there are a few places you can look. For starters, we have Donny Cates' Venom run, which started in 2018, in which the Maker shows up in the 7th issue and remains an antagonist for Eddie Brock and his son Dylan, up to and including the events of Absolute Carnage. With his multiple bodies across the multiverse, he also shows up in the pages of 2019's Future Foundation miniseries. However, the best place to jump in to continue his story is probably the book Ultimate Invasion, in which the body that had been imprisoned after his defeat at the hands of Roberto da Costa escaped into another reality, Earth 6160, and embarked on a time travel scheme to mold that world into one he saw fit, creating a new Ultimate Universe, namely by preventing as many superhero origins as he possibly could from ever happening. But that's all I have for you this week, and so thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, then be sure to let me know in the comments and upvote any suggestions that you agree with to get them up near the top so that I see them. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!